Okay, good morning to everyone present here and everyone watching us online. Don't forget to have everyone watch at youtube.com/@education2conf. It's a fantastic day today to learn and connect with leaders of the education world. We'd like to take this opportunity to remind you to use the hashtag education2conf for any tweets, posts, or stories you share on social media before we start our engaging and interactive sessions for day 2 of the conference. I'd like to thank our platinum sponsor, Leadership Masters, for this wonderful collaboration. Now, without further ado, let's begin the first session of the day. Our session's moderator and panelists will take us through their discussion on the topic, if we want students to love learning, we must create an environment where it is safe to fail. The stage is all yours.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm Dr. Katherine Bihr. I'm the managing partner for Academic Solutions Group, which is a consultancy that works with educational leaders to help build capacity so we can do great things in school, because our kids certainly deserve not only great teachers, but great leaders as well. Today we're talking about this topic of failure, which we're going to get into in just a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves, maybe tell a little bit about your background and maybe what interests you about this topic of failure.
So my name is Graeme. I'm a lawyer and a tech founder. The only way I got here was through failure. And that's what piqued my interest in this topic. And I think that if we can get students to feel comfortable with failure, more of them will be here in these conferences and in these powerful places.
Hey everyone, my name is Hughart. I'm the CXO and co-owner of the Teach Better team. And failure is a daily conversation for us. We are working with students K-12, but even in my own background, I grew up with special education support and had endless teachers that did their best to try and make me successful. And I think it's only through failure that we are able to really develop as full human beings. So excited to talk about this topic.
My name is Dr. Donna Vallese. I am Director of Learning and Continuous Improvement in Green Central School District in upstate New York. And I'm also the CEO and coach for Inspiring Leaders, which is my business. And we work with instructional leaders to support their work with their staff to get better outcomes for students. And so my interest in this work really comes because I'm really a curriculum and instruction geek. It's really about how do we enamor students with learning. And when we fail, we are actually learning, because failure means that we've actually learned one way that didn't work. And so we now have to think of a new entry point.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Mary Thomas. I am from the Austin Independent School District in Austin, Texas. I've been in the field of education now since 1975, so you do the math. As a teacher, special education teacher, for over 13 years, as an assistant principal, a principal, initially going to central office in identifying children of color who were not identified as gifted and talented because so many people had the belief that they couldn't be. And the last 25 years in executive director of state and federal and private accountability, basically overseeing grant money. And most of our grants have been that additional boost. I'm in this work because this is what I've been in since 1975. I come across, unfortunately, so many people who believe in the deficit model. I am completely opposite of the deficit model, no matter who we're talking about, children, staff, parents, no matter across the board. So I seek solutions. Recently, as a week ago, I additionally passing that passion to, I was elected as a school board member in a neighboring school, board. The Manor ISD school board. And here I'll get a chance from the board perspective to make policies that will not support the deficit model.
We're just introducing ourselves and maybe talking about what brings you to this topic of failure.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody, and I apologize for being a little tardy here. So the topic around failure, I think, is so important because we live in a society where there's always winners and losers. You have to have both in the society that we created. And I think that it gives failure a very bad stigma. Personally, my journey through education, I've learned that failure is absolutely necessary to be a part of the process of real success. So I flew out here from Seattle. We're in a blizzard right now because this conversation is so important to me.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm really going to give a challenge to the panelists here. I teach a class in creativity and innovation. And one of the things that I have students do is to create a failure resume. And the idea is really to think about, think of a time when maybe you haven't had success. It could be a professional piece or a personal piece. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot here at all. But what I'm interested in is, what is your process for dealing with your own failure? Because I think in order for us to solve this issue for young people, we have to be somewhere ourselves as well. So anybody would like to maybe tackle that, talk about that?
I'd like to jump out there.
Sure.
I believe that failure is never final. And that's where I start. We have to, as she shared, have failure, because what it does, it allows us to take a look at what happened and what didn't happen. And then it gives us a really big boost to make it better.
Yeah.
There's always that opportunity for reflection. So you stop, you reflect, you identify, well, what is it about that did not work? What part did I play in that? What do I need to do differently? And then there's always, like you said, that forward motion. And so what are my new next steps?
Yeah, so one of my co-owners, Chad Rashowski, says that failure is a first attempt in learning, which I think really resonates with what all of you are saying. As we reflect on improvement, it needs to be the first step. And I know we're going to get so much more into this, but a big part of the work that I've grown to be so passionate about is driven by mastery learning, which is allowing students to have the time and autonomy to truly have the space to master their content before adding new challenges on top. And I find teachers do this for themselves constantly. We are constantly in the classroom reflecting, revamping, and it's such a beauty that comes with that failure term, right? That first attempt in learning is, you don't succeed the first time, you find the next step.
I think it comes down to, at least for me, being comfortable asking for help. When you hit that brick wall and you're like, what am I doing here? What's the issue? Am I able to identify the problem here? And then being able to say, hey, friend, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this code? Can you help me with this algorithm or something like that? And I think that as a student, it's difficult to ask some teachers, or all teachers, depending on how comfortable you are with them.
So I think that I think I'll share a story about failure, because I feel like everyone answered some really great tactical ways of tackling failure. If it wasn't for failure, I probably wouldn't be here today. I was a broadcast journalism student out of college, and my failure happened when I was facing prison time. And because of that, I pivoted when I did not go to prison, and instead I ended up having a federal felony, which for me personally prevented me from going into the news industry. And so my pivot went to education. And when I think about 17 years later now and sitting on this stage and many stages and being able to reach out and connect with young people and not so young people too, about being able to take failure and turn it around and use it for something good. And so when I think about our college programs and how we work with our college students and we give them opportunities, if I didn't have that experience at 21 years old, graduating from college, getting my bachelor's degree, being a first generation college graduate from Detroit public schools, not supposed to go to college, and to get smacked in the face with that at the finish line was very difficult. But through that process, I learned resiliency. I also learned that how to fail in public, which could be very embarrassing, being a journalism student and being in newspapers and on the news for, something that you covered. So I think that failure can be a very beautiful thing, and as long as you have supportive people around you that let you fail forward.
Yeah, thank you. So many great points. In my previous life, I'm also a recovering middle school principal. And, I think it's really important that we create space for kids to be able to learn, of course. But I'm kind of a firm believer that learning just doesn't happen just because you're at the front of the classroom and teaching something. You have to do some things in order for learning to take place and in order for kids to feel safe. So talk about maybe some of the skills that maybe you've seen either you've used as a teacher or an educator, or things that you've seen like great colleagues do that are really things you've tried to emulate.
I'd say building authentic connections with your student. That really worked for me, and I've seen throughout my education the teachers that really saw like a problem child like myself in school and really dug deep and asked me what was going on, or like how can I approach these problems differently, and that connection made me open up to them, and I'd say that's the reason why I'm here.
Yeah, I can jump in. I do have to say, I find that this concept of needing skills is so important because oftentimes in education, but in other fields as well, we highlight what we need to do, but we don't necessarily always provide the action step, right? How do we actually make that become a reality? We always keep it top level. And so for me, it really comes down to finding some sort of framework, some sort of system that allows educators to take all those puzzle pieces that they know is so important for students and find ways to start clicking them together in a way that is systemic and scalable. So obviously I have my favorites, but finding some sort of mastery framework, I personally like the grid method, but something that allows the teacher to remove themselves from the front of the room, being the content delivery system. There's so many other new innovative ways to deliver information, and asking students to start taking ownership over their learning so the teacher can do what we all like to do, which is facilitate and question and be a part of those aha moments that allow for failure, but allow for failure to be a movement in finding then the next solution of success. That's really hard to do when you're sitting in front of the room with 34 pairs of eyes on you and you're trying to find the one thing that's going to work for everyone versus really personalizing this experience. So I think that that is what it comes down to, is trying to find those frameworks, those supports that allow teachers to be themselves and facilitate so that failure can become a norm in the classroom versus that one time you hand back a quiz and it feels like garbage.
Yeah.
Connecting that dots, I believe it's developing relationships, because if you don't have the relationships and they are authentic, as he has stated, then you don't have the connection. And you have to have the connection in order for the scholar to feel comfortable to be able to relate to you. And that might start for not being in front of the classroom, because that's all traditional. At the same time, not becoming that buddy or that pal, because that's a different level. You can have a relationship that has some of those qualities, but I have worked, especially more so as an assistant principal, because I was a type of assistant principal. You didn't just come to me, or I didn't go to you just because you had done something wrong. I took on whatever grade level I had, middle school, high school, whatever grade level, and I went and worked within the first 30 days and met every one of those students so that they would have at the end result, not, well, I didn't go to her office because I wasn't a bad one. Because I get that along these years is, those saying, well, you were my principal, but I wasn't a bad one. No, I didn't have quote unquote bad one. That fosters that relationship that today they still can come and have conversations and feel safe.
And I think safety is very important, and being a partner to schools, because we're a community-based organization and we have programming available within our state for women and girls. I think being able to really partner with the schools, because the girls, they'll share certain things with us in our competency-based learning that they would never share with a teacher, right? We give them a real opportunity to be able to reflect. But I think the gap in our programming, at least, is really being able to work closer with the teachers in the school, so it could be more of a partnership. But I do think that it's very important that we are able to meet students where they are, kneecap to kneecap. And I also want to share too, that I think sometimes as we're trying to pull certain students up to get them to an area where they can perform and be successful and feel success, that sometimes we also hold back others who have those skills. And I think that that's why it's so important to meet students where they are, because you don't want to hold some people up, but you also want to make sure those ones who are left behind are able to get put up a little bit more.
We also have to genuinely believe that children can do what we want them to do, or what we need, what we believe they need to be able to do. We have to have that genuine belief. And I actually have a little anecdote that will demonstrate that. So when I was in high school, there was a club I was part of, and we found ourselves with no advisor. And so I went to my favorite history teacher. I said, we don't have an advisor for this. Is there any, I know you're busy. Is there any way you could be the advisor? And he told me, he said, I can be the advisor, but only on paper. I don't have time for this. But he goes, I know you can do it, but you're going to have to do everything. And I did everything. And so that gave me the confidence to be able to do everything. So fast forward years later, probably one of my best demonstrations of this in the classroom, I was a technology teacher and coordinator, and I had a 7th grade class, and they were doing advertisements. And so we were talking about language, and they had learned all these different programs over the course of several years. And so they had voice and choice in what type of advertisement they were going to do, if they were going to do a video or a newspaper ad or whatever type of ad they wanted to, podcast, whatever. So I had this group of boys that they wrote a script, they filmed it, they put it in iMovie, they edited it, they put the text in, they finished before everybody else, and they said, can we use Scratch and program and animate something else and do something else? And I said, sure, okay. So they go ahead and they animate this little thing, and then they go, we're still done and everybody else is still working. So can we embed our Scratch animation into iMovie? I said, I don't know, can you? And so they were like, well, I don't know. So I said, well, try. They said, well, how do we do it? I said, I have no idea. So I had to give them the space and the belief that maybe they can figure it out, because I have no idea. But we sat for a couple of classes and we tried and tried and tried, and we couldn't figure it out. And then they said, can we put it on thumb drives and take it home? I said, sure, take it home. Maybe the computers that you have at home can do something our computers can't. So they took it home and they got together over the weekend and they brought it back and they had embedded it. They had embedded something from scratch, was a cute little animation into a video from iMovie. And fast forward years later, I take a different group of students to Olin College, and I meet one of the creators of Scratch. And I tell him this story, and his mouth drops. I said, why you act surprised? He goes, because we did purposely design that so that it could not be embedded or you couldn't do anything with it. And I said, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but these 7th grade boys figured out how to take their animation and embed it. And he goes, I have no idea how they did it. I said, I don't know how they did it either. And they couldn't tell me how to replicate it, but they figured it out. So, but the learning that I think they took away from that, and the confidence that they got from that, and the number of times they failed and then ended up succeeding, I can't even count. But I imagine probably those boys are probably doing some incredible things right now. I need to catch up with them.
Yeah, no, thank you. It makes me think so much, Ray, I'm gonna kind of go back to you for a minute. You mentioned, and Donna talked about it too, about really what does it mean to put the student at the center of their own learning and really allow them to help drive the direction that we go as educators. I don't think we do that very much. We make everything in our classroom all about us, what's convenient for us, what the time schedule is for us, when can I go to lunch? All of those things are all about me as the teacher. What would happen if we actually turned it around a little bit?
I think it's scary. It's scary for an educator who studies years and years and years in college, goes and even maybe gets a master's degree and says, but you aren't going to look like you're in charge because we're going to put these 11-year-olds, middle school people, or elementary or high school students in charge of their own learning. And for many teachers, I don't think you find a teacher that disagrees with wanting to do what's best for kids, wanting to foster an environment where students can safely fail, and wanting to have those success moments. The struggle is we're not supporting our teachers in understanding how to do it, and like I said earlier, in a scalable way, not just on a great lesson on a Tuesday morning where we're all excited to go to school that day, but how do you also make Wednesday special and Thursday special? And that's where I come back to, maybe it's a fault of my own, but I grew up SLD in math, reading, and writing. And so I find myself often really leaning on routines. I'm somebody who I can't be creative all the time. I struggle and I'm not successful if I don't have a system. So I'm going to challenge educators here and listening, finding a way that you can find a framework that can allow you to do everything you want to do, I believe is the only way to do it. We can't just pull magic out of a hat every day, right? Then you're going to have a day where you do not provide everything you want for your children. And so I think as we reflect on putting students at the forefront of learning, it really comes down to supporting teachers in seeing how to do that so that they feel safe to try it. Because educators are students and learners as well in our own capacity. And all we need are the tools to be successful, just like our students. So I would challenge educators to connect with a community that has solutions for you, or connect with, everyone here on this stage has great value for you. Find a system that allows you to try in a safe space with data supported research to allow students to look like they're in charge, with a lot of support on the back end, making sure that you as the teacher have control where you're aligning your content, backwards design from those standards and all that good stuff. So it comes with, I think, finding support and also finding a system that is proven to work.
I totally agree with systems as well. Like being one of those people, when I think back to being in school and school time and like you said, struggling sometimes, like I'm very creative naturally, but needing those systems and those guardrails. I think with us being a community-based organization, we have a little bit more autonomy to be able to create programming where we can put students in the front. And so some of what we do is from the very beginning, when we started this program, we included students in the creation of it. It's a competency-based program. We took about 2 to 3 years before we ever rolled it out. We did several focus groups. We did case studies. We met with women who were in their 60s and we asked them, when you were 11, what did you need that you did not get in the classroom? We met with grandmothers. We met with mothers. We met with people who did not have education. We met with people who are high achieving, WNBA women, everyone. And what we found out, the key component from all these women, no matter where they came from an economic standpoint, it was confidence, it was self-esteem, it was self-efficacy, it was self-discovery. And we were able to really build this very unique program for these girls in our state of Washington. We also added on a cohort out of Nigeria. And even the girls in Nigeria, their financial needs are totally different than our American girls. But once again, those same key components were there. Self-discovery, self-efficacy, self-esteem building. And I think that what community, education, as well as like CBOs, we can really make some real change happen within education. And students, they do have a place in that. They really do.
I'd say technology-based projects. The internet is exploding with new technology. every day. I'm sure all of you have heard of OpenAI and these chatbots and all these amazing products that make it extremely hard to compete. And the thing is, kids have been growing up with these technologies. And I'm thinking, why not empower them to continue to use it, to continue to thrive while guiding them and being the steward in their education.
Really great. Can I go back to Katie for just, oh, you're gonna go ahead.
I was just on technology. One of the things we have to all do as adults is we have to throw down that pride. The kids know more than we do. We, many of the adults that I work with, take a sense of power, or it's a presumed power that is really false, that they are going to teach the kids, whereas this is their world. The 2- and 3-year-olds grew up with, that's one of the first things that they did, is they had some sense of technology somewhere in their world. And I believe that one of the things that we can do is to do what my colleague here did and allow them to be the creators, as opposed to us being the authority to say, you will do it my way. And that technology is the number one area that we need to do that in.
I also, I've led multiple schools where blended and personalized learning is the key focus. And so while we're talking about putting students at the center, that does not mean that direct instruction completely goes out the door. There is still room for it, but direct instruction does not and should not ever happen for 50 minutes all at once. We have to chunk and allow kids to chew for longer than we've chunked it. And chunking it means like 10 to 15 minute chunks, and then we give them at least 15 to 20 or 25 minutes to chew or longer. And so helping teachers to give up the control is the hardest part of implementing any sort of blended or personalized learning structure. And so when I was leading a charter school as the founding dean of dean of instruction, we had teachers who were all brand new in the classroom, and I walked into a classroom and 50 minutes with 25 students, this teacher droned on, and only 5 of the 25 students had an opportunity to ask a question, respond to a question, or make a statement. Only 5. The rest were pretty much checked out. So I just took the data, I wrote the data down, and we talked about just the data. I said, tell me about this. What's happening with all the rest of them? Well, I can never get them to pay attention, she says. I said, so what are we going to do about this? That we're a blended learning school. We've got technology. How are we using this? She's like, well, I know you want us to be doing groups and we should be rotating, but I can't just put some kids over here because they'll like go wild. Like they're just not in my control. I said, so we have to make sure that when we've got students in a collaborative group, we've got students in an independent group, that we give them really purposeful things to do. And that when you have students in front of you in your group, that they have opportunities to really have discourse, not discussion, discourse. There is a fine difference between those two. And so we worked with that. I coached her on it. We went through, we did some lesson plans. I gave her a few weeks to kind of try some new things out. I went back in. She implemented this whole new structure. And I took the same data and I just tracked the number of students who had opportunities to ask a question, respond to a question, or make a statement. And 100% of that class spent time responding and talking. If we want students to be able to learn to read and write well, Having oral language is number one. It starts there. And even high school teachers, this was a high school, they have to understand that.
So really, thank you so much, all of you, for some really great insights and some good thinking. And I hope you all are taking notes out there and are ready to become inspired. But we're going to talk about solutions in a little bit. But I want to tee up, Katie, you for a minute. I think sometimes in education, it's very difficult for us to look outside of our four walls where we're working and learning and teaching and so on. But you've mentioned a few times now as a community-based organization, the work that you're doing, and I want to give you a chance to maybe explain a little bit of that and how you have gone to become an active partner and an engaging partner with others within your community. And for the rest of the panel, think about also what are other successful partnerships? Because you know what, guys, we got a lot of work to do in this country in education. We got a lot of work to do in this world. And if we aren't looking outside of ourselves, the answer is not in this room. 100% it isn't in this room. It's so much further than that. It's outside of this space. It's understanding what's happening in the world today. And so we have to put our egos aside here and really think about, where can we find good solutions? So tell us a little bit about your organization and how you built that partnership.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So Katie Hall Foundation, we will be 9 years old next year. We're really excited. And we started out focusing on women and the wage gap. And what we found in those conversations and all of those events we were holding is that these women said, if I would have had this at 11, man, I would have been so much further along. If I was able to work across race, across economics, with women when we were girls, man, how much further along would we be in the workforce? And that's where it started. And so from there, what we did is we partnered with the University of Washington, which I am a affiliate professor there. And we partnered with a lot of the colleges in the area, and we took cohorts of college students, and we graduated 60 of them in 7 years in the state of Washington. And we paid for some of them to get their master's degrees as well. And we had them come back into our programs, and they created Girls on a Rise. It took 3 years for them to create it. We didn't just roll out any type of crap. We kept assessing it. We would roll it out in formats at schools. And at the end of the day, we did bring the young people in there. However, structure is absolutely important within that process. And so now our partnerships are with our whole entire superintendency system, and our program is statewide. Our goal now in 2023 is to have our actual cohort of leader girls, and they're between 11 and 17, to start lobbying. In January, we'll be going up to Olympia to lobby so they can understand how to advocate, how to use their voice for things that are bigger than them. And I think something very key is when we learn how to take our ego and put it aside and go kneecap to kneecap with our principals, our superintendents, and I think really importantly, our teachers, because our teachers are in the classroom and we're their support system. And so we have done great work in 9 years. Over the next 9 years, we have to do greater work. And part of that is buddy systems with the schools, buddy systems with where the money is at. Because yesterday on the panel I was on, we were talking about money and about the teachers not making enough money. And one of the things I thought about is when us CEOs, when we get those $1 million contracts, we should really be partnering with those principals and those teachers who are going above and beyond and helping us run our programs. We should have to give them stipends, part of their salary. We should help.
Need some claps, you guys, for
Yeah,
that.
so good.
Good stuff.
Now we are gonna have to connect. I'm such a fan of what you're doing. Oh, girl, don't make me blush. But I will say I love this because we always joke that education is like the perfect deli sandwich. You need to layer all these different pieces on top of each other. There's not one thing that's going to fix it, but if we can find a few different things, then yum, right? And we were talking earlier about competency-based learning, mastery learning, personalized learning. That's one facet of supporting our schools. The other element is bringing in the community. A model that we work frequently with, which I think will work perfectly with what you're discussing. So there's so much more to be done here, is where we support teachers in creating themed internships that are sponsored by local or national organizations to foster students having the purpose of their content at the forefront before the actual instruction even begins, which allows our communities to come into our schools by just being themselves and sharing their background, their expertise, their history, and then allowing the students to see your learning in action. So you can leave the four walls of your classroom and actually be reminded of the continual work you are doing. And if we can support our teachers K through 12, because you can do this at any level, we're creating students that not only can see the purpose prior to all the work that we're going to have them do to master the content, but we also are allowing our communities to truly get a space to understand what's going on in our schools, which in turn supports our teachers, because we become no longer this mystery building doing things to our kids, but a true community-based building, which is so important. So I'm so excited to learn more about what you're doing.
That this model, the model that we've been talking about, is just a must-have to go explosive. Because one of the things that I have seen over for sure the last decade is losing that first year teacher. We're losing too many after the first year, and it is because they weren't connected with their program in college. We have to do a better connection with our professors who are in these teacher training programs and teacher certification, and not creating this, I guess, this fantasy of when they walk into that first classroom that it looks like what it's not. And they're selling them a bit of goods that it is not the current student. So as a result, you hire them, they're excited. That first year they quit and they don't come back. And then we can't find them. It has a domino effect. So we got to reach and teach. When you know better, you do better with our colleges and universities and these types of models. So you have to come to Austin, Texas.
I'd like to piggyback on basically what everybody else up here said, is that there's a necessary connectivity between the classroom and real world and the work. And so building that, answering that why. Why am I learning geometry? Well, if you want to be an architect, got to learn geometry. That's something I wish I was told. You know, I would have been more interested in geometry. But that connection between, hey, if you're interested in this, this is why we're learning it. And I think a lot of these programs and things that we're all talking about up here would be amazing things to do.
I think to your point, and this is going to go to higher education, I'm bouncing it right to higher ed. I know far too many math teachers who cannot answer the question, when will I use this? When I can tell my son when he will use that geometry, and I can point out, hey, you just did a proof. No, I didn't, Mom. Yes, you did. If, then, if, then, if, then. That's a proof. Mom, you're supposed to say that because you're a teacher. That was geometry, Evan. Sorry. When I can point out geometry, but his teacher cannot tell him when he will use it, it's a problem. We have a problem, particularly with math, not quite as much science, I don't think, but particularly with math, our teachers do not know when on earth their students are going to use the math that they're learning. And that is a very sad state.
Like even in the medical field too, like what even being able to explain, I mean, what you're saying is so important. And I think that that's across industry, is communication, because you're absolutely right. When I think back to being in those science classes, like it wasn't, or math in particular, like how are you going to use this later? That was never explained. And so I could have been a great mathematician, but I tapped out because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go over to communications because I can see a direct impact on how that impact. And so I agree with you 100%. And I think a lot of it is how they're communicating, and that application piece of it is what I hear you saying. And I totally agree with you.
Yeah, but isn't that where the fun is? So I'm a recovering math teacher, but I will say, I know, but I will say, when we get to do the work where we, use this model to create themed internships, that's where like the teacher face comes out, like the smile, a teacher gets when they're enjoying their craft. That's the fun part. I think it's truly as a space where, whether it be math teachers or other educators, we just forget and we get into a system and routine that doesn't force us to remember. And I think it's such a wonderful space when we're able to create time for educators to reflect on the purpose and the why, because we all love it. It's the fun part of our job. So I just think, again, finding the time to do this work is sometimes the most challenging part. So a system that forces us to use those practices is essential.
So it ends up being the fun part for us because we can reflect. It is the challenge of the scholar who doesn't know to do or to that, does not know what that is or what they were supposed to have done. And that's where we have to do a more reaching and to be able to connect with the scholar who is going to apply it. And I have a vested interest in every young person I touch personally, because I want to live a long time and I want them to know about geometry and science and the whole bit, because they will be so much in charge of who and what I will be doing.
Even having them know what professions, different parts of mathematics or science are used and how they're used so that they can visualize how it's used. So for instance, trigonometry is used in military warfare. Submarine has a target. You've got to figure out how you're going to get the torpedo from point A to point B. You're using trigonometry. You need to know your cosine table. Like simple things like that. I am such a nerd. I'm a very proud nerd.
Well, look,
Right. But these are things that kids really want to know. They want to, like, and those are ways that we can engage them and interest them in careers.
Yes.
If we actually can answer their questions.
yeah. So we're boiling down. I know y'all are sitting there going, wait, this is about like how we're setting our campuses up, like to not have kids fail and whatnot. Like,
Yeah.
what the hell are they talking about it here?
We just go on bird
But
walks.
let me just tell you that I think this is all connected, right? I mean, it's an opportunity for educators to problem solve and think and show vulnerability in the way that they act and feel and how they're constructing learning for themselves and also for their classrooms. So I think it is all connected. It's an important conversation. And in these final few minutes here, I'd like you to think about something that you would recommend this group stop doing this, start doing this, or continue this. Okay, what should people stop, start, and continue, or continue?
I'm just going to pick one specific thing. We have to practice what we preach. So if we want teachers to create space where students can fail and learn from their failures, we have, did you get that? We have to create space where teachers can fail and learn from their failures. And for that to be okay, and for that to not show up on their evaluations, which is so high stakes now. They need the space to fail and to try things just like we're asking them to give their students. That's the only thing I'm going to say.
Mic drop moment. Good job. Anybody else? Something stop, start, or continue for this group?
Yeah. Well, I would say that I think that when we even look at what happens in the schools every September or August, depending on where you live, with the school shootings, and then you get the 1, then the 2, then the 3. As we're talking about failure, we have failed as a society. We have failed our children, and it's not the teacher's fault. It's not the superintendent's fault. This is a society issue. I think that when we look at some of the elderly that could really come into the schools and really be able to help from a volunteer standpoint, I think that's important. I also really believe in paying teachers more. And if we can't get it out of the regular systems, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm gonna keep mentioning it until it happens, at least within my sphere of influence, is that as a CBOs get these larger grants, that we're partnering with those schools and we're partnering with very particular teachers to help our programs be inside out, and that some of our money needs to go not just to the schools, but to that actual teacher, so they can get a little bit more funding for them going above and beyond. Because education, when I think back to my education, you learn a lot in the classroom. You learn just as much outside of the classroom. And I would say, as far as stopping, let's stop blaming our teachers and let's start integrating as parents into that. I'm talking to myself too, as I have a 7-year-old. Being able to be in those schools, make time to be in the schools with the teachers. It's not, I mean, it's our kids, for crying out loud.
I think the one element I would suggest based on our short conversation here is, we've been able to have a conversation with 6 wonderful educators up on this stage, each with their own resources and perspectives to share, each with their own connections and tools that hopefully can solve one small element of this massive undertaking that we have. My challenge would be to connect, find a community, not just a person, find a community that can support you so that as you become a learner, not just in one area, but hopefully all of the areas, you begin to start to puzzle piece those supports. So that's a huge element that I'm fortunate enough with my company to support, is bringing people together. And I challenge all of you to continue to make that a focus so that we can be better in mastery learning, community-based projects, and everything in between that comes up in the future.
So I'd like to leave you with this. For every one of us in this room or who's in earshot, do the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons, expecting the right results to benefit our scholars, our staffs, our parents, and our community. When we all do that and we do that consistency, we're going to see growth, we're going to see forward and a vertical movement.
I'd say continue being open to technology and the solutions that students come up with using them.
Yeah, so great. Well, in these final moments, things that I've heard today, stop blaming, right? That was one thing I heard. Start engaging, right? Get involved. You want to make change? You're here today at Education 2.0, but this shouldn't be the end of it, right? Who's in those other meetings out there that you can learn from? How can you engage them as well in your schools and in your communities to actually make learning better for young people? And then, continue doing the right thing. I love that. It's so simple. And continue looking for answers, right? Using technology, leveraging it, and meeting kids where they are. This has been such a fabulous, we've solved all the problems. Y'all can go out gambling now. It's been a great day. Thank you so much to our panelists. Let's have a hand for them. And thank you all for being here today.